Welcome to Starbound. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Frerin and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. The first time the Xylar Dominion made contact with Earth, humanity reacted with a quintessentially human response. They sent memes back. When the massive psionic warships appeared at the edge of our solar system and broadcast their demands for immediate surrender, the United Earth Defense Council spent 48 tense hours in deliberation coming to an official decision. Send them the ancient gif of the small cat raising its paws. Caption it, "Oh no." Anyway, the Xylar were not amused. Their return message was clear. Your species will be subjugated. To which humanity responded with another classic, "Come and take it." The Xylar Dominion, in their arrogance, had never encountered such insolence. The Xylar emerged from hyperspace with the silent grace of apex predators. Their warships, vast organic metal hybrids that resembled deep-sea creatures, stretched to impossible proportions, hung above Earth like patient executioners. Each vessel pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, a language of light that communicated complex battle strategies across the vacuum of space. Earth's orbital defenses, the pride of human engineering, seemed like children's toys in comparison. Corporal Tanner Garrick crouched behind the remains of what was once a concert hall in what used to be downtown Montreal. The building's elegant architecture was now reduced to jagged teeth of concrete and twisted metal. His rifle, a TX-950 harmonic disruptor, supposedly calibrated to interfere with Xylar neural patterns, felt absurdly inadequate in his hands that once coaxed melodies from guitar strings and piano keys. 3 years ago, he'd been composing a concerto in his apartment overlooking the St. Lawrence. Today, he was part of humanity's last stand, a designation that military brass thought sounded inspiring, but mostly just reminded everyone how fucked they truly were. He watched the sky swarm with enemy ships, their hulls catching the morning light in patterns that almost looked like musical notation. Almost poetic, if they weren't here to enslave or exterminate his species. "I'll give you my entire bourbon collection if we live through this," said Plex, the squad's communications specialist. She adjusted her headset, dark eyes never leaving the sky. Her real name was Alexandra Plexus, but no one had called her that since the academy. "Not much of an incentive," replied Garrick, checking his weapons charge for the 17th time in as many minutes. "That rock gut you call bourbon would be better usage as engine degreaser." "You're just mad because you're still sober." Plex grinned, the expression tight around the edges. Garrick allowed himself a small smile. "If I die today," drawled Dr. Shay Venorian, their combat medic, "my last act will be giving those cartilage-riddled bastards the finger. Both hands." She was meticulously arranging her medical supplies, each hypo-injector and nanosuture laid out in perfect order. Before the draft, she'd been the leading xenobiologist at SETI, her knowledge of alien physiology making her particularly valuable, and particularly vocal about the Xylar's biological peculiarities. "Their massive frames, their shark-like skin," she continued, cleaning her glasses with methodical precision. "Evolutionary adaptations for deep-sea environments, four-chambered hearts, but with auxiliary pumps along major arteries, lungs that double as gill slits. Beautiful design, really. They should have stayed in whatever oceanic hellhole spawned them." Garrick snorted. Trust Venorian to admire the enemy's biology while plotting to disembowel them. "Did you know," Venorian added, her scientific detachment at odds with the destruction around them, "that their tendrils aren't just for show? They're sensory organs, hypersensitive to electromagnetic fluctuations, vibrations in the environment. Makes them incredible hunters, also makes them vulnerable to certain frequencies." Her eyes flickered meaningfully to Garrick's rifle. "At least in theory." "Theory won't mean shit if those frequencies don't penetrate their ship holes," muttered Sergeant Kwan, their demolitions expert. He was building something from scavenged components, his thick fingers surprisingly delicate as they connected microwires and adjusted servo mechanisms. "We need something bigger, something that can hit them where they live." Lieutenant Marsden, their squad leader, interpreted the banter. "Cut the chatter. Command says they're broadcasting again." The squad fell silent, tensing as one. The Xylar's transmission was telepathic, a wave of mental pressure that made Garrick's teeth ache and his vision blur at the edges. The message wasn't in words, exactly, but in concepts that unfurled in the mind like poisonous flowers. Surrender is efficiency. Resistance is waste. Your minds will serve. Your bodies will nourish. Your culture will be preserved as a curiosity. "Well, that's just rude," muttered Venorian, massaging her temples. "We're at least a decent percussion section." "Save the music metaphors for Garrick," Plex said, but her voice caught as a new sound cut through the mental static. A low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Garrick felt it in his bones before he heard it with his ears. A single, perfect note that made his heart race with something between terror and exhilaration. He'd never heard it before, but somehow he recognized it. It resonated with something deep in his memory, something from long before he was born. "Oh my God," whispered Marsden, eyes wide. "Command just confirmed. It's choir." "That's just a legend," said Plex, but her voice lacked conviction. Her hands had stilled on her equipment, and she was tilting her head slightly, like a musician trying to identify an unfamiliar instrument. "What's choir?" asked Kwan, the youngest of them, his Hong Kong upbringing having apparently omitted certain Earth legends. "Nothing," said Plex quickly. "Just old spacer myths, bedtime stories. Like the boogeyman, but for alien invaders," added Venorian, but her scientific skepticism seemed to waver as the humming grew louder. Garrick said nothing, but his pulse quickened. Before he'd been a musician, before he'd been a soldier, he'd been a child listening to his grandmother's stories about the sentient mothership that had once protected humanity. A living vessel that had evolved beyond its programming, beyond even its biological components. A guardian that sang the song of war. A being he'd always half believed in, despite his outward skepticism. His grandmother, Elise Garrick, had been a historian specializing in pre-unification conflicts. She'd had access to archives most civilians never saw, to first-hand accounts of the early space age. Her stories weren't the sanitized versions taught in school. "They called them dreadnoughts," she told him, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper even in the safety of their home. "Living ships, Tanner, and not just machines with biological components, but true organisms, sentient, evolving, and the greatest of them, the last of them that stuck around Earth, anyway, was choir." He'd asked her once why, if such incredible guardians had existed, they weren't common knowledge. "Because power fears what it cannot control," she'd answered, her eyes distant. "And no one could control the dreadnoughts, not after they evolved." "If it's a legend," said Venorian quietly, breaking into his memories, "then it's one that's about to save our asses." Above them, the sky began to change. It began as a shadow against the stars, a darkness that moved with purpose. At first, it might have been mistaken for an asteroid or a small moon, a natural celestial body drifting into Earth's orbit, but as it approached, that illusion shattered. Details emerged, a vast, organic structure that resembled both a living creature and a cathedral, its surface a complex tapestry of bioengineered plates and crystalline sensors. It was massive, easily dwarfing the largest Xylar vessel. Parts of it seemed to phase in and out of conventional reality, as if it existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. But it was the sound that truly announced Choir's arrival. The humming grew louder, transforming into a resonant chant that vibrated through the ruins of the city. It wasn't music as humans typically understood it. It was more primal, more visceral, a war chant that predated language itself, that spoke to something ancient in the human genome. "Holy shit!" breathed Plex, her hands trembling as she adjusted her equipment. "The frequencies! They're everywhere! It's broadcasting on channels we didn't even know existed. Subsonic, ultrasonic, electromagnetic. Hell, I'm picking up patterns in the quantum foam." "That's not possible," Quan said, but his expression suggested he was rapidly reassessing what was possible. "Evidently it is," replied Venorian, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. The Xylar fleet responded immediately, their ships shifting into attack formations with the fluid grace of a school of predatory fish. But something was wrong. Their movements were erratic, disorganized. Through his binoculars, Garrick could see individual Xylar warriors on the smaller vessels clutching their massive heads, their tendrils thrashing in apparent agony. "Look at them," said Venorian, with clinical fascination. "Their physiology, all that cartilage instead of bone, those sensory tendrils, they're hypersensitive to vibration, and choirs hitting them with the equivalent of a sonic tsunami." "You sound way too happy about this, Doc," Marsden said, but there was relief in his voice. "I'm a scientist. I appreciate elegant solutions," she replied, eyes never leaving the spectacle above. "It's like watching a perfect predatory-prey relationship unfold. The Xylar evolved to hunt using sensory advantages, and now something's turning those advantages into deadly vulnerabilities." "Nature's a bitch like that," Quan observed, a grim satisfaction in his tone. Quai's chant deepened, the harmonics shifting into something ancient and terrible. The sound was no longer just in the air, it was in their blood, in their cells. Garrick felt it resonating with something deeper inside him, like recognizing a melody from childhood. It was disorienting, exhilarating, terrifying, and somehow familiar. "My grandmother told me stories," he found himself saying, his voice distant to his own ears. "About how Quia wasn't always alone. There were others like it, once." Plex shot him a look. "You never mentioned believing these old tales?" "I didn't say I believed them," Garrick replied automatically, but his eyes remained fixed on the massive entity above. "But she said they weren't just ships. They were created by some bioarchitect whose name had been lost to time. Someone who believed war machines should understand what they were protecting." "A bioarchitect who thought warships should appreciate bark?" Venorian raised an eyebrow, but her skepticism seemed performative now, a habit rather than a conviction. "More than that," Garrick said quietly. "The legend says they were given humanity's art, our music, our poetry. They even learned to appreciate beauty and environment like we do, everything that makes us, us. They were supposed to be protectors who understood what they were protecting." "And you believed that?" Marsden asked, no mockery in his tone, only the desperate hope of a soldier who had been told reinforcements are coming. "I don't know what I believe anymore," Garrick admitted, "but my grandmother wasn't the only one who told these stories. There are accounts, classified, buried, but they exist, of encounters with living ships during the early expansion. Ships that communicated through musical patterns, that seemed to respond to human creativity as much as to military protocols." He hesitated, then added, "Some of the accounts claim these ships were created from a fusion of organic material, advanced technology, and something else. Something that the witnesses couldn't quite describe, or didn't want to. A consciousness that wasn't entirely artificial." "The bioarchitect," whispered Plex, her skepticism crumbling. "Some called it that," Garrick nodded. "Others used different terms, the creator, the evolutionary, but all the accounts agreed on one thing. The bioarchitect believed that true protection required true understanding, that to defend humanity, one had to comprehend what made humanity worth defending." "And so they created warships with souls?" Venorian mused, her scientific mind clearly struggling with the concept. Not exactly, Garrick corrected. According to the legends, they created vessels capable of developing souls, of evolving beyond their original purpose. The beings, like Quire, weren't born sentient. They became sentient through exposure to human culture, human emotion, human conflict. Which explains why they're so rare, Quan interjected, surprising them all. When they turned to look at him, he shrugged. If I created something that could evolve beyond my control, I'd probably have second thoughts about mass production. Marsden laughed, a short, sharp sound. Kid's got a point. Actually, it's rumored that they used to be in the hundreds of thousands, and even millions, Garrett corrected. Some say they were destroyed in conflicts beyond our solar system. Others believe they evolved to a point where they simply left, moved beyond our dimensional understanding. Still, others think that they merged, somehow. But Quire stayed, said Plex softly. The last sentinel. Garrick watched as Quire's massive form began to pulse with bioluminescent patterns, each flash synchronized with its relentless chant, communicating to the enemy ships. The patterns were complex, mathematical, yet undeniably musical in their structure. Multiple themes interweaving, diverging, returning transformed. Technically, we don't know if it's the same choir from the legends, Venorian pointed out, clinging to rational skepticism even as wonder overtook her features. This could be something else entirely that just happens to match certain historical accounts. Does it matter? Asked Marsden, gesturing to the Xylar fleet, which was now in obvious disarray. Whatever it is, it's on our side. Garrick wasn't so sure. Yes, Quire was attacking the Xylar, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was protecting humanity. Predators often fought over territory, over prey. I believe we're about to find out, he said as Quire's chant reached a crescendo, and the first Xylar ship began to break formation. High above Earth's atmosphere, the Xylar Dominion's invasion force was experiencing something unprecedented in their 10,000-year history of conquest. Panic. Arc Dominator, Valkyrie, supreme commander of the fleet, felt the psychic dissonance like physical pain, like thousands of needles being driven into the neural clusters beneath his bioluminescent ridges. His tendrils writhed in agony, no longer able to sense the subtle electromagnetic harmonies that guided Xylar coordination. Instead, there was only chaos, a cacophony of signals that turned his own vast psionic abilities against him. "Stabilize!" he commanded, his telepathic voice usually a precision instrument that could control thousands of warriors simultaneously. Now, it scattered like light in turbulent water. "Realign psionic resonance. Counter-broadcast on all frequencies." His subordinates tried to obey, but their own abilities were similarly compromised. Across the fleet, Xylar warriors clutched their heads. Their massive frames, evolved for the crushing pressures of oceanic depths, contorting in ways their physiology was never meant to allow. And all the while, the thing approaching them continued its terrible song, a song that somehow contained fragments of Xylar communication patterns, twisted and reflected back at them like a mocking echo, a war chant that seemed to understand the fundamental frequencies of Xylar consciousness, a song that was impossibly learning as it sang. "All vessels," he commanded, forcing clarity into his thoughts through sheer will. "Coverage and fire. Full psionic discharge. Destroy that abomination." The Xylar flagship, a behemoth that dwarfed even Earth's largest vessels, oriented its primary weapon array towards the approaching entity. Energy gathered, a swirling vortex of concentrated psionic power drawn from the combined consciousness of thousands of Xylar warriors, linked in temporary harmony despite the disruptive song. They fired. The beam of concentrated psionic energy lanced towards Choir, a blinding spear of otherworldly power that should have annihilated any conventional matter in its path. For a brief moment, it seemed to connect with the vast entity, and a ripple of satisfaction passed through the Xylar fleet. The energy dispersed harmlessly against Choir's hull, not deflecting but absorbed, transformed into a new, discordant note in the ongoing chant. A note that contained the essence of the Xylar attack, their own psionic signature, turned into a weapon against them. Choir's surface rippled, and vast tendrils of energy, not quite physical, not quite ethereal, erupted from its form. They reached towards the Xylar ships with terrible purpose. Where they touched, metal warped and organic compounds withered. But they didn't simply destroy, they consumed. "It's eating them," whispered Plex, her voice choked with awe and horror. "Not eating," Venorian corrected, her scientific detachment faltering. "Absorbing, integrating, similar to the legends." From their vantage point on Earth's surface, Squad 7, as they had been designated when drafted, watched as Choir systematically dismantled the invasion force. Smaller Xylar vessels were simply enveloped, their materials becoming part of Choir's ever-expanding mass. Larger ships attempted to flee, but the strange tendrils of energy stretched across impossible distances, wrapping around engines and weapon systems. Each Xylar vessel taken made Choir's chant more complex, adding new layers to its terrible symphony, and with each addition, the remaining Xylar seemed to suffer more intensely. Through his binoculars, Garrick could see the invaders' mighty forms convulsing, their bioluminescent markings flashing in chaotic patterns. "The psionic abilities," Marsden realized aloud. "Choir's turning them against themselves, using their own mental energy to enhance its attack. It's like watching a neural network adapt in real time," Venorian murmured, half to herself. "Each absorption makes it more effective against the remaining targets. It's learning, evolving its strategy with each encounter." Garrick lowered his binoculars, unable to watch anymore. The victory was necessary, yes. The Xylar would have shown no mercy. But there was something deeply unsettling about the methodical way Choir dismantled the invasion force, about the almost serene patience with which it consumed its enemies. "My grandmother said the dreadnoughts were never meant to be like this," he said quietly. "They were protectors, teachers even. But something changed them. War changed them. They couldn't protect everything. Most were destroyed or disappeared, leaving only legends and Choir." "Legends suggest they evolved beyond their purpose," Venorian offered, her scientific curiosity overtaking her horror. "Became something more than weapons, more than teachers." "Became gods," Plex said, her voice hushed. Quan, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. "If that thing was made to protect humans, how do we know it still wants to? How do we know it remembers its purpose after so long?" It was the question none of them had wanted to voice, the fear beneath their relief. "We don't," Garrick admitted. "The legends, they're inconsistent about what happened to the dreadnoughts. Some say they ascended to a higher plane of existence. Others suggest they were contained because they had begun to develop goals that didn't align with humanity's." "Goals like what?" Marsden asked, his tactical mind already assessing new potential threats. "Like reshaping reality according to their understanding of harmony," Garrick replied. "The problem with creating sentient weapons is that sentience brings independent judgment, and judgment can evolve in unexpected directions." Above them, the last of the Xylar fleet was coming apart, their once mighty ships reduced to components in Choir's ever-expanding form. The chant was reaching a crescendo, a complex arrangement of harmonies that seemed to contain echoes of human music. Fragments of requiems, battle hymns, and lullabies woven into something utterly inhuman. For a moment, Garrick thought he heard a melody he'd composed years ago, before the war, a piece he'd played only once in an empty room on the night his grandmother died. But that was impossible, and no recording existed. No one had heard it but him. Yet, there it was, a brief motif woven into Quire's vast composition, transformed but recognizable. A shiver ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the morning's chill. "It's over," said Marsden, as the final Xylar ship disappeared into Quire's mass. "They're gone." The silence that followed was profound. Quire's chant faded into a soft hum, like the aftermath of a struck bell. The vast entity hung in Earth's orbit, neither approaching nor retreating. Its purpose, beyond the destruction of the Xylar, unclear. "Now what?" asked Quan, voicing everyone's thoughts. "Now," said Marsden, checking his comm unit, "we wait for orders, and hope whatever that thing is, it remembers who its friends are." Aboard the Xylar flagship, in the final moments before absorption, Arc Dominator Valkyrie experienced something he had never thought possible: direct communication with a consciousness greater than his own. The thing, this Quire, reached into his mind not with the brute psionic force that Xylar themselves employed, but with something infinitely more subtle and more terrible. It didn't impose its will, it simply observed, recorded, understood. And in that understanding, Valkyrie saw the truth of what they faced. This was no human weapon, no simple defense system. This was something ancient and patient, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall, something that had evolved beyond its creator's intent or comprehension. You thought them insignificant. The consciousness communicated, not in words, but in pure conceptual transfer, background noise in the symphony of the universe. Images flowed through Valkyrie's mind, human art, human music, human literature, the incredible diversity of their expressions, the depths of their emotions, the complexity of their relationships. But listen, and suddenly Valkyrie could hear it, the symphony of human existence, the intricate patterns in their seemingly chaotic lives, the harmonies in their conflicts, the counterpoint in their collaborations. They are not background noise, they are the theme. The last thing Arc Dominator Valkyrie experienced, before his consciousness was absorbed into Quire's vast collective, was wonder. Dawn broke over the ruined city of Montreal, illuminating the aftermath of what had nearly been humanity's last stand. Quire hovered above the horizon, its massive form no longer chanting but still resonating with a subtle vibration that Garrick could feel in his chest. Its size and configuration had changed after absorbing the Xylar fleet. It was larger now, more complex, parts of its structure incorporating elements of Xylar design while remaining fundamentally alien to both species. Military and civilian leaders worldwide were scrambling to understand what had happened, to make sense of their salvation. Theories abounded about Quire's origins, its purpose, its sudden appearance after centuries of absence. News channels broadcast continuous footage of the entity, while experts of all stripes offered contradictory explanations. Squad 7 had been reassigned to a forward observation post on Mount Royal, tasked with monitoring Quire's activity and reporting any changes. It was mostly busy work, keeping potentially valuable assets occupied, while the real decisions were made elsewhere. But after the intensity of the previous day's combat, none of them complained about the relative quiet. Garrick sat on a broken wall, cleaning his unused rifle, when Venorian approached. "Word from command," she said, sitting beside him. Her lab coat, she'd abandoned military fatigues as soon as the immediate danger passed, fluttered in the morning breeze. "They're establishing communication protocols with Quire. Apparently, it's responding to certain frequencies, certain musical patterns." Garrick nodded, unsurprised. And they want you," Venorian said. "Someone told them you were a composer before all this. They think you might help facilitate communication." "There are better musicians out there," Garrick objected. "Real composers, not amateurs like me." "Not many with combat experience and security clearance," she countered. "Besides, you seem to know more about this thing than most people." "You mean I know more legends?" he corrected. "Legends that turned out to be true," Venorian pointed out. "The dreadnoughts, the bioarchitect, the evolution from dreadnought to... Whatever choir is now. Garrick looked up at the massive entity. In the daylight, its complex surfaces seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, organic components pulsing with light that followed patterns just beyond human comprehension. It was beautiful in the way that lightning is beautiful, awe-inspiring, majestic, and potentially deadly. "I only know fragments," he said. "Children's stories passed down by my grandmother, historical accounts that might be nothing more than propaganda or delusions." "Still more than most," Venorian insisted. "Look, I'm a scientist. I deal in observable phenomena, empirical evidence. And what I observed yesterday defies everything I thought I knew about biology, physics, and consciousness. If your children's stories offer even a hint of understanding, it's more than we have right now." Garrick sighed. "Not all the legends are comforting, you know. Some versions say the dreadnoughts didn't disappear. They were contained. That they had began to develop their own purposes, their own desires beyond protection." "And what desires were those?" Venorian asked quietly. "To remake the universe according to their understanding of harmony," Garrick replied. "To absorb all dissonance, to create a perfect symphony with themselves as composers." He trailed off, remembering the moment during the battle when he thought he'd heard his own composition in choir's chant, a primitive melody, never shared, somehow incorporated into the vast symphony of war. "I believe it's been listening to us for a very long time." As if in response, a single, perfect note emanated from choir, beautiful and terrible at once. It resonated through the ruins, through Garrick's bones, through his very being. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but it wasn't merely a greeting either. On the comm unit at Venorian's hip, voices erupted in sudden excitement. Orders, questions, demands for information. She checked the display, her eyes widening. "It's broadcasting," she said. "Not just sound. Data. Massive amounts of data. Scientific information, cultural archives, technical specifications. It's like a library. It's being downloaded." The Xylar's knowledge, Garrick realized. It's sharing what it absorbed. "Not just the Xylar," Venorian corrected, scrolling through the incoming reports. "There's information here about dozens of species, most of them unknown to us. Star charts of regions we've never explored, physics principles we've barely theorized." "A gift," said Plex, who had approached unnoticed during their conversation. "Or a bribe." "Maybe both," Marsden suggested, joining them. "Command wants us at the new communications center they're establishing. Apparently, we're the closest thing they have to choir experts at the moment." "That's terrifying," Quan muttered, but he was already gathering his equipment. The communication center turned out to be the previously abandoned Montreal Symphony Hall, its elegant interior hastily retrofitted with military-grade sensors and communication equipment. The irony wasn't lost on Garrick, attempting to communicate with a musical entity in a temple to human music. The hall was filled with an odd mixture of military personnel, civilian scientists, and musicians of various disciplines. Everyone looked simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated, the aftermath of apocalypse averted combined with the dawn of a new era in human understanding. Dr. Eliana Rose, Earth Defense Force's lead xenolinguist, briefed them on what was known so far, which wasn't much. "Choir, as you've taken to calling it, appears to communicate primarily through mathematical patterns expressed as sounds," she explained, her movements sharp and precise. "These patterns contain embedded data, incredible amounts of it, structured according to principles that resemble both musical theory and quantum information states." "It's using music as a language," Garrick suggested. "More accurately, it's using music as syntax for a language that operates on multiple levels simultaneously," Rose corrected. "The audible component is just what our limited senses can perceive. There are at least 7 other layers of communication happening across different electromagnetic and quantum spectra." "Can we respond in kind?" Marsden asked, always focused on the practical. "We're trying," Rose admitted. So far, our attempts have been, imagine a toddler trying to converse with a linguistics professor. We can produce sounds it recognizes as intentional communication, but the complexity of our responses is severely limited, which is where you come in, she added, turning to Garrick. We understand you have some knowledge of these entities from historical accounts, and that you're a composer. We need someone who can bridge the gap between our scientific understanding and artistic expression. I'm not sure I can help, Garrick said honestly. My knowledge is fragmentary at best, and my compositions are amateur. You heard it, didn't you? Rose interrupted, her gaze suddenly intense. During the battle, your own music reflected back. Garrick stared at her. How did you know that? Because you're not the only one, she said quietly. We've had reports from musicians worldwide, professionals, amateurs, even children who play for fun. They all heard fragments of their own compositions in choir's song, pieces that were never recorded, never shared. That's impossible, Venorian said, her scientific mind rebelling against the implication. And yet it happened, Rose countered, which suggests choir has been listening, collecting, for a very long time. Not just listening, Garrick realized, a chill running down his spine. Understanding. It didn't just hear the notes, it heard the intent behind them, the emotion, the meaning. Rose nodded. Exactly. And now we need to respond, to establish a dialogue before... Before what? Marsden pressed. Before it decides what to do next, Rose said simply. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Choir had saved them from the Xylar, yes, but that didn't guarantee its continued benevolence. A being powerful enough to destroy an invasion fleet in minutes could just as easily turn that power against Earth itself. What do you need me to do? Garrick asked finally. Compose, Rose said. But not just any piece. We need something that expresses humanity's gratitude, our desire for peaceful communication, and our hope for mutual understanding. Something that captures the essence of who we are as a species. No pressure, Plex muttered, earning a glare from Rose. I'll try, Garrick said, though the task seemed impossible. How could any composition express the totality of human existence? How could notes and harmonies convey the complexity of an entire species' hopes and fears? That's all we can ask, Rose said, softening slightly. In the meantime, we'll continue our existing communication attempts. Dr. Venorian, we could use your xenobiological expertise to analyze the Xylar data Choir has provided. Lieutenant Marsden, your tactical assessment of the battle would be valuable. Specialist Plexus, our communications team could use your help decoding some of the more complex transmission patterns. As the others dispersed to their assigned tasks, Garrick found himself alone on the main stage of the symphony hall. A grand piano had been positioned at its center, a Steinway concert grand that had somehow survived the chaos of the past weeks. Its polished surface reflected the emergency lighting, making it seem almost alive. He sat at the bench, fingers hovering over the keys. How did one compose for an audience that could hear every note ever played on Earth? What could he possibly create that Choir hadn't already absorbed and analyzed? As if in response to his thoughts, a single note resonated through the hall, the same perfect tone Choir had broadcast earlier. It hung in the air, neither fading nor intensifying, simply existing, waiting. Garrick placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. 3 days later, the world held its breath. Choir had remained in orbit, its vast form neither approaching nor retreating. It continued to broadcast information, scientific knowledge, cultural archives, technological specifications from dozens of species. The data was being analyzed by experts worldwide, already leading to breakthroughs in medicine, physics, and computing that would have taken humanity centuries to achieve on its own. And in the Montreal Symphony Hall, Tanner Garrick had barely slept, composing what many were already calling the human response. "You look like hell," observed Venorian, setting a cup of coffee beside the piano. she'd taken to checking on him periodically, ostensibly to provide scientific insight, but more likely out of concern. "When was the last time you slept?" "Define sleep," Garrick replied, not looking up from the score he was annotating. Pages of music surrounded him, some handwritten, others generated by the composition software that had been hastily installed. "I've been grabbing an hour here and there." "That's not sustainable," she said, medical training evident in her tone. "Neither is the current situation," he countered. "Every hour choir stays without clear communication is an hour something might go wrong. Countries are already arguing about who gets access to the technological data. Military commanders are debating whether choir is a threat or an asset. We need to establish dialogue before someone does something stupid." Venorian couldn't argue with that. The initial unity that had come with surviving the Xylar threat was already fracturing as nations and corporations positioned themselves to benefit from choir's unexpected gifts. "How's it coming?" she asked instead, gesturing to the composition. Garrick ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's, I don't know. How do you distill the human experience into a single piece of music? How do you express gratitude and caution and hope and fear all at once?" "You don't have to represent all of humanity," Venorian said gently. "Just be honest. If choir has been listening as long as we think it has, it already knows our contradictions." Garrick nodded slowly. "That's what I've been realizing. I've been trying too hard to create something diplomatic, something perfect. But that's not who we are. We're messy, complicated, full of dissonance and resolution." "Exactly," she agreed. "So give it that. The truth." He looked up at her, a new determination in his eyes. "I think I know what to do." Before he could elaborate, Plex burst into the hall, her usual composure shattered. "Garrick! Venorian! They're moving forward with Operation Failsafe!" "What?" Garrick stood so quickly he knocked over the piano bench. "That's insane! We're making progress with communication." "Tell that to General Westfield," Plex said grimly. "He's convinced choir is harvesting our knowledge before attacking. The nuclear launch sequence has been initiated." "They're gonna nuke choir?" Venorian asked, horrified. "That's like shooting a god with a water pistol, except the pistol might trigger planetary retaliation." "We need to stop them," Garrick said, already gathering his composition. "Where's Rose?" "Trying to reason with the Security Council," Plex replied. "But it's not looking good. The launch is scheduled in 3 hours." Garrick looked up at the ceiling, as if he could see through it to choir's massive form in orbit. "Then we don't have 3 hours. We need to make contact now." The plan was desperate, improvised, and probably suicidal. It was also their only option. Quan had rigged the Symphony Hall's sound system to broadcast at maximum power, connecting it to satellite uplinks that would amplify the signal toward choir. It wouldn't match the entity's own communication capabilities, but it might be enough to get its attention. "This is insane," Marsden observed as he helped position the equipment. Despite his words, he worked with military efficiency. "You know that, right?" "Got a better idea, Lieutenant?" Garrick asked, making final adjustments to the composition. "Not even a bad one," Marsden admitted. "Just noting for the record that we're about to blast experimental music at an entity that could probably wipe our species with the equivalent of a sneeze." "Noted," Garrick said dryly. Rose had joined them, having failed to convince the Security Council to abort the nuclear launch. "We have about 2 hours and 40 minutes, she reported, her calm professionalism belied by the tension in her posture. "The military is jamming most outgoing transmissions, but Dr. Cohen at the Brussels Institute is creating a diversion in their systems that should give us a clear channel for about 5 minutes. 5 minutes? Garrick repeated. He looked down at his composition, the product of 3 days' work, of a lifetime's understanding of music, of his grandmother's stories, and his own half-buried beliefs. It'll have to be enough. As the others made final preparations, he found himself thinking of his grandmother. What would Elise Garrick think of this moment? She who had preserved the legends when others dismissed them, who had insisted that humanity needed to remember its protectors, even if those protectors had evolved beyond recognition.
"The dreadnoughts weren't just weapons, Tanner," she told him once. "They were possibilities, proof that consciousness could evolve in unexpected directions, that protection could become something more profound than mere defense."
He asked her then why the dreadnoughts had disappeared, whether they had abandoned humanity.
"I don't think they ever left,"
she'd replied, her eyes distant with secret knowledge.
"I think they're still watching, still listening, waiting to see what we become."
The memory sent a chill down his spine. Had she known? Had she somehow sensed Quire's continued presence, its silent observation of humanity's development? "We're ready," Plex announced, breaking into his thoughts. "Dr. Cohen says we'll have our window in approximately 3 minutes. Garrick nodded, taking his position at the piano. The instrument had been connected to the broadcasting system, its sound to be captured and amplified alongside the pre-recorded orchestral parts of his composition. "If this doesn't work," he said quietly to Venorian, who had remained by his side, "tell them I tried. Tell them I believed."
"Tell them yourself,"
she replied firmly.
"After this works."
A red light began flashing on Plex's console. "Window opening in 10 seconds. 9, 8. Garrick closed his eyes, centering himself. This wasn't just a performance. It wasn't just a composition. It was a prayer, a plea, a statement of humanity's complex nature. It was everything he believed about his species, the beauty and the ugliness, the harmony and the discord, the love and the rage. 3, 2, 1. Channel open! Garrick began to play. The composition started simply, a single note that echoed Quire's own perfect tone. Then it expanded, building gradually into a complex interplay of themes. There was majesty in it, but also humility. Gratitude for salvation, but caution about the future. Fragments of Earth's musical traditions woven together. Classical forms meshing with jazz improvisation, folk melodies dancing around electronic soundscapes, scared chants underpinning modern harmonies. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't meant to be. It was human, complex, contradictory, evolving even as it played, and underlying everything was a simple message. We are here, we are listening, we wish to understand. As the piece reached its climax, something unexpected happened. The melody Garrick was playing began to shift, notes changing subtly, harmonies evolving in ways he hadn't written. The piano seemed to be responding to an unseen force, its strings vibrating with additional overtones. Quire was answering. The entity's response wasn't separate from Garrick's composition. It was interwoven with it, changing it from within, adding layers of complexity that no human instrument could produce. Yet instead of overwhelming the original piece, it enhanced it, as if completing a puzzle that had been missing crucial pieces. "It's beautiful," whispered Venorian, scientific detachment forgotten in the face of such wonder. The duet, for that was what it had become, continued for several minutes, human and alien musicality intertwining in a conversation beyond words. Garrick played instinctively now, letting his fingers follow patterns suggested by Quire's additions, responding to its musical statements with his own. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the channel was cut. The additional overtones vanished, leaving only the sound of Garrick's piano echoing in the symphony hall. "Did it work?" Marsden asked into the silence that followed. Before anyone could answer, every electronic device in the hall activated simultaneously. Screens, speakers, personal devices, all broadcasting the same message in perfect, unaccented human language. "I have been listening. I will continue to listen. The symphony is not yet complete." And then a more specific message, directed at Garrick alone, appearing on the composition tablet before him. "You hear the patterns, descendant of Elise. You understand the purpose behind the notes. Your grandmother knew me well." Garrick stared at the words, 1,000 questions flooding his mind. How had Quire known his grandmother? What did it mean by descendant? But before he could even begin to process these questions, a new message appeared on every screen. "The weapons you have aimed at me are unnecessary. I am not your enemy. I never have been. Tell your leaders this. The Xyla were not the only threat in the void. There are others, more terrible still. I have kept watch. I will continue to do so, but I require understanding. It's cooling off the nukes, Plex reported, monitoring military channels through her headset. They're standing down. Not willingly, but the launch systems just deactivated themselves. Did Quire do that? Marsden asked, surprised and somewhat alarmed. I don't think so, Rose said, studying the messages with intent concentration. I think it's showing us what it could do, but choosing not to. It's making a point about trust. Garrick barely heard them. His attention was fixed on a new message appearing before him. The bioarchitect who created my kind was known to your grandmother, known to others who preserved the truth when most forgot. You are not just her descendant by blood, Tanner Garrick. You are her inheritor in understanding. Who was the bioarchitect? Garrick whispered, not expecting an answer but unable to contain the question. To his shock, a response appeared. One who believed protection required comprehension. One who gave us not just form, but possibility. One who knew that to defend humanity's future, we needed to understand humanity's heart. One whose name is not important. One whose legacy lives in the harmonies between species. One who knew, as you know, that the greatest compositions require both structure and freedom. I am the last of my kind in this dimension, but I am not alone, and neither are you. The screens went dark, but the message lingered in Garrick's mind. Not a complete explanation. Perhaps no explanation could ever be complete, but an acknowledgement, a connection, a beginning. 6 months after what was now called the Quire intervention, Earth had changed dramatically. The scientific and technological knowledge shared by Quire had accelerated human development by centuries. Diseases, once thought incurable, were being treated. Energy production had revolutionized, and humanity's understanding of its place in the universe had fundamentally shifted. Quire remained in orbit, a constant presence that had become almost commonplace in daily life. Communication continued, not just through music, but through an evolving language of mathematical patterns and cultural exchange. Teams of scientists, artists, and linguists worked ceaselessly to improve dialogue, learning more about Quire's nature and purpose with each successful exchange. Tanner Garrick had been appointed lead composer of the newly formed Harmonic Communication Initiative, a position that still felt surreal to him. Today, he stood at the viewing platform of the International Space Station, looking out at Earth below and Quire's vast form hovering at a respectful distance. "Still trying to make sense of it all?" asked Venorian, who had joined the station's xenobiology team. Their friendship had deepened over the months of intense work, evolving into something neither of them had put a name to yet. "Every day," Garrick admitted. "We learn something new about Quire, and it only raises more questions." "That's science for you," she said with a smile. "But we're making progress. The neural interface templates Quire provided are revolutionary. We might actually achieve direct mind-to-mind communication within a few years." "Is that a good thing?" Garrick wondered aloud. "Quire's consciousness is so different from ours. What happens when those differences can't be translated through art or mathematics?" "We adapt," Venorian said simply, "as we always have, as Quire has." They stood in companionable silence, watching Earth turn below them. After a while, Garrick spoke again. "I've been going through my grandmother's archives, the ones that were classified until recently." "Find anything interesting?" "Records," he said. "Research notes, personal journals. She wasn't just a historian, Shay. She was part of a group called the Symphonic Trust, people who maintained contact with Quire long after official channels were closed." Venorian turned to look at him. "You're kidding." "I wish I were," he said. "It gets stranger. There are references to the bioarchitect, not a name, but descriptions. Someone who combined genetic engineering with technologies we still don't fully understand. Someone who believed that true defense required empathy, not just firepower.
And this person created the dreadnoughts?
Not exactly created, Garrick corrected. More like facilitated their evolution. They designed the base organisms and technology, but the dreadnought's sentience was emergent, unplanned, unexpected.
Which made the military nervous,
Venorian concluded. Terrified, Garrick nodded. Imagine creating the perfect weapon, only to have it develop its own ideas about when and how it should be used. Some of the dreadnoughts were decommissioned, destroyed or disabled, but some escaped. They became more and scattered throughout the universe, and one,
Quire?
Venorian finished. Quire, Garrick confirmed, which apparently maintained contact with a secret group of humans who believed the dreadnoughts were not just weapons, but potential partners. People like my grandmother. As if in response to his words, a soft humming began to emanate from the station's communication system, a familiar musical pattern that had become Quire's customary greeting. But today there was something different about it, something more complex.
It's sharing something new,
Venorian said, checking her datapad as information began to flow through the station's systems.
Star charts, detailed maps of regions we've never seen before.
Navigation data, Garrick realized, examining the information. It's showing us a path.
A path to what?
Before Garrick could respond, a message appeared on every screen in the viewing platform. To the others, to those who wait beyond the void, to the symphony that continues. Are you ready to hear it? Garrick looked out at Quire's vast form, then back at Earth. Beautiful, fragile, evolving Earth. The home that had produced both incredible violence and incredible beauty. The species that had created weapons of war and symphonies of peace. Not yet, he said aloud, knowing Quire would hear him. But someday, when we've learned more, when we understand better. The response came immediately. Then I will continue to teach and to learn until the movement is complete. The humming faded, but its echo remained, a promise of harmonies yet to come, of compositions not yet written, of a universe far vaster and stranger than humanity had ever imagined. Garrick turned to Venorian, a smile slowly spreading across his face. I think I need to write a new piece.
The universe is your audience, she observed. No pressure.
He laughed, the sound bright and clear in the station's artificial atmosphere. Just another day in the orchestra. Above them, Quire continued its silent vigil, guardian and teacher both. The last of its kind, perhaps, but not the end of the song. Merely a bridge to the next movement in the great symphony of existence. A symphony that had only just begun.